The wind was already shifting when the knock came. Dry and bitter, it carried sand and the scent of lightning, a storm riding on dust. The kind of wind that rattles your bones, that makes good animals shy away, and makes honest men lock their doors without ever asking why. But Silas Ten Crow, he had no one left to lock the door for. Not anymore. He was oiling the hinges of a stall door in his barn, alone with his thoughts and the thunder rolling in from the far-off plains. And that's when he heard it. 3 sharp, rapid knocks on the barn's side door. Not the front gate, not the main house. The side door, the one nobody ever used. He froze. His calloused right hand hovered over the Colt on his hip, a gun that hadn't been touched in weeks, but was never, ever far from his reach. No one came this far out onto his land, not unless they were lost, or they were dangerous. The knock came again, but this time it was softer, almost like it regretted the first one. Silas moved slow, quiet as a shadow. He pressed his back against the rough wood of the barn wall and slid toward the door. The wood was warped, cracked in a few places, just enough to see through. Through a sliver of a crack, he saw a figure. Cloaked in shadow, a hood pulled low over her face. Her arms were wrapped tight around a bundle she held close to her chest. Then he heard a voice, barely a whisper over the wind. "Please don't shoot. I have a child with me. Just don't open the door unless you mean to help." Silas didn't open the door. Not yet. He took a step back, his voice rough as he shouted through the wood. "Who are you?" There was a long pause. He could hear the wind howling, the barn creaking. "No one," she said. "Just someone running out of night." And that's when the child whimpered. It was a sound so small it barely existed, but it sliced straight through the years, separating Silas from the last time he'd ever heard a sound like that. It cut right through him. He unlatched the door. She stumbled inside like a ghost that had been chased through hell itself. Her dress was torn, there was blood on her hands, but he could tell none of it was hers. Her boots were soaked through with creek water, and her knuckles were scraped raw, like she'd been punching rock, and in her arms, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, was a child, a baby boy, couldn't have been more than a year old. Silas took a single step forward, and she let out a low, sharp scream. "Don't! Don't look at him! If you do, he won't survive the night!" She scrambled backward into the deepest shadows of the barn, cradling the boy close to her, trembling like a single leaf in a firestorm. Silas stopped dead in his tracks. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," she gasped, her voice ragged, "they're coming, and if they know you've seen him, they'll burn you alive right along with us." Her voice cracked, the desperation turning into pure, uncut terror. This wasn't the kind of fear born from guilt. This was the terror born from knowing exactly what some men are capable of. Silas slowly lowered his hand from his gun. She was trembling even harder now, her whole body coiled around the child like living armor. He looked past her, out toward the open plains beyond his barn. There were no torches, no riders. But the silence was all wrong. It was too quiet. Even the coyotes had stopped their calling. "What's your name?" he asked. "No names. Not here." Silas let out a long, hard sigh. "You're bleeding on my floor, lady. You might as well start with a name." She hesitated for a long moment. "Esperanza." He gave a single, sharp nod. "Silas." She said nothing. The child made another small, restless noise from beneath the cloth, and Silas felt his eyes drawn to it. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper, something he'd buried a long time ago. But Esperanza flinched again, shielding the child's face with her body. "No, you can't." "What?" "Don't look at him," she pleaded. "If you see his face, you'll understand why they're hunting us." Silas's jaw tensed up. "Are you carrying something stolen?" "No." She looked him dead in the eyes, and her gaze was like chipped flint. "I'm carrying something they think they own." That sentence landed like a shovel hitting the dirt of a fresh grave. Silas knew that feeling all too well, being hunted for something someone else wanted to erase from the world. He stepped back, leaned his weight against a wooden post. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the tin roof overhead like a drumbeat of bad news. "You should have kept riding," he said, his voice low. "You bring men like that to my door, and it won't be just you who dies here tonight." "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone's got a choice," he shot back. "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not when you've got blood on your heels and a baby in your arms." The old barn creaked. The horses stirred uneasily in their stalls, one of them kicking at the wood. Silas looked at her again, but this time he really looked. Not just at her, but through her. She wasn't lying. He didn't know what kind of hell she was running from, but it was real enough to bring a storm right along with her. He nodded toward a pile of hay in the corner. "Stay low. If anyone comes, you don't speak. You don't breathe. I didn't see you." Esperanza practically collapsed into the straw, the child tucked so tightly against her chest, you couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. She closed her eyes, her lips moving silently. A prayer or a memory? Silas couldn't tell the difference. He grabbed his lantern and moved to douse the flame. But before he did, he cast one last look at her, at the small bundle in her arms. He still couldn't see the child's face, but he saw her grip tighten. Her knuckles were bone white, desperate. She was holding on to that little body like it was the last thing anchoring her to this earth. And for one terrible, gut-wrenching heartbeat, Silas remembered the exact weight of his own son's fevered body in his arms. He remembered that small, awful silence between breaths. He killed the flame. Darkness swallowed the barn whole. And then, far off, but getting closer, he heard it. Hoofbeats. Steady, deliberate. 4 or 5 riders. They weren't rushing, they were hunting. Silas didn't move, neither did she. Only the wind spoke, whispering something cold and final. Then a voice, loud, a roar riding the storm. "Ten Crow!" Esperanza's breath hitched in her throat. "You know that voice?" Silas whispered. Her eyes welled up with tears. "If you do," she choked out, "if you answer him, we're both already dead." The barn shuddered as another gust of wind slammed against its walls, dust swirling through the slats like angry spirits. Silas stayed crouched near the door, his eyes narrowed, his hand resting just above the worn leather butt of his Colt. The hoofbeats had stopped. No more than 100 yards out. He could feel the weight of them, 4 or 5 horses, maybe more, standing still, just waiting. Then came the voice again, deeper this time, louder, soaked in the kind of arrogance that only blood and fire ever wash away. "You hand her over, Ten Crow, or we salt the earth with your name." Silas recognized it now. Marshal Jed Hawthorne, the goddamn bastard. He hadn't heard that name in years. He had hoped to never hear it again. The last time he saw Hawthorne, the man had burned an entire village to the ground, all under orders, he wrote himself. He called it justice. Silas called it murder. In the corner of the barn, Esperanza tensed, her entire body frozen against the straw. The baby, Mateo, let out a tiny squeak, no louder than the creak of old leather, but in that charged silence it sounded like a gunshot. Silas stepped quietly away from the door and motioned to her with 2 fingers. "Stay down." She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Fear hadn't loosened her tongue. It had turned her to stone. A shadow passed by the barn window. Another voice joined Hawthorne's, this one lower, more gravelly, older. "You sure he's in there, Marshal?" Silas's teeth clenched. That voice belonged to Hank Grady, Hawthorne's second in command, a mean drunk who was better with a match than he ever was with a badge. Silas shifted his position, moving to a crack in the barn wall, and peered through. The orange flicker of torches danced across his field like a swarm of fireflies. 4 riders had dismounted, their boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. "He's in there!" Hawthorne barked. "Ain't no one else for miles." "Should have stayed in the canyon," Silas whispered to himself. He turned back to Esperanza. "Do not move unless I tell you." "Will he shoot?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Silas didn't answer because he didn't know. He eased toward the barn door and raised his voice just enough to carry. "Marshal Hawthorne. Been a long time." There was a pause. Then he heard that familiar ugly sneer in Hawthorne's voice. "10 Crow. Still breathing, I see. Shame." Silas pushed open the barn door just enough to look out, careful not to give them the whole silhouette of his body. Rain had started to spit again. Light, but building. It would soak everything by dawn. Hawthorne stepped forward, a torch in one hand, the other resting lazily near his sidearm. The firelight danced across his silver badge, catching the edge of it like a freshly sharpened blade. "You got company in there, Silas?" he asked. "Heard someone ran through this way. A woman, with a child. You seen her?" "Just me and my horses," Silas replied, his voice even. "And they don't talk much." One of the other riders, a tall, lean younger man, snorted. "Then maybe we can go in and check for ourselves." Silas's voice dropped, becoming cold as a grave. "You step 1 foot inside my barn, you'll never use it again." The young rider shifted, uneasy. Hawthorne didn't even blink. "Don't be stupid, 10 Crow. She's a fugitive. Stole something from the law." Silas's grip tightened on the doorframe. "The law didn't ride with torches back when it still meant something." Hawthorne's jaw twitched. "You think this is about some little thief? That brat she carries ain't just a child. He's a symbol. He's a weapon. His father stirred up sedition across half the territory, and now his blood runs through that baby's veins. You know what that means, 10 Crow?" Silas didn't respond. He just stared. "It means," Hawthorne said, taking another step closer, "that if we don't put him in the ground now, he'll grow up thinking the same poison thoughts his daddy did. Better to kill a weed when it's still soft." And that was it. That was the moment. Silas opened the barn door all the way and stepped out, moving slowly, deliberately. His Colt was drawn, but he held it low, pointed at the dirt. Rain glinted off the dark metal like moonlight on bone. "You ain't laying a finger on that child." Hawthorne's eyes widened just enough to show his surprise. "So, you are harboring her." "I'm protecting what's innocent," Silas said. "Something you gave up on a long damn time ago." The torch in Hawthorne's hand hissed in the wet air. He dropped it, letting the flames sputter and die in the mud. "You think this ends here?" he asked, his voice a low snarl. "No," Silas said. "I think this starts here." They stood like that for a full minute, 5 men, 4 guns pointed at one, and one man standing between a child and a war. Hawthorne finally nodded to his men. "We ain't starting a firefight in the rain. Not yet." He turned to mount his horse. "But next time, 10 Crow, we won't ask so nicely." He swung into the saddle. "We'll be back by sunrise, with warrants, with dogs, and with fire." The riders wheeled their horses around and thundered off into the night, their torches bouncing in the dark like angry, departing spirits. Silas holstered his Colt, but he didn't move. He just stared into the emptiness where the men had been, the sound of their departure lingering in the air like the final breath of something holy. Behind him, Esperanza emerged from the shadows of the barn. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice shaking. He turned slowly to face her. "Maybe not, but I did. They'll kill you. I've been dead longer than you know." She looked down at Mateo, who was sleeping now, oblivious to the fury that had just passed them by. "Then why?" Silas glanced at the boy, at his tiny chest rising and falling, his little fists curled near his chin. "Because that child didn't choose who his father was," he said, and because blood doesn't decide who deserves to live. For a long moment, silence hung in the barn, thick as the dust that clung to everything. Esperanza stepped closer. They'll come in force next time. I know. What do we do? Silas turned toward the back of the barn, his mind already working, already 2 steps ahead. We ride, tonight. There's a woman up in the arroyos. Her name's Lena Smoke. She might help us. Do you trust her? I don't trust anyone, he said, pulling saddles from their racks. But I trust that she hates Hawthorne more than she hates me. Esperanza nodded slowly. Then we go. They gathered their things quickly, quietly. Silas saddled 2 horses, wrapped Mateo in a dry cloth, and loaded their meager supplies in silence. Before he mounted, Silas looked back one last time at the barn. At the old wood, the scarred beams, the home he'd built after everything else in his life had fallen apart. He wondered how much longer it would stand. Then he swung into the saddle. Let's move, he said, his voice grim, before the dogs catch our scent. And just like that, they vanished into the night, 3 shadows swallowed by the high desert storm. The dogs, they both knew, were not far behind. The desert was colder than it looked. It was a cold that crept under your skin and made a home there. The kind of cold that didn't come from the wind or the altitude, but from the deep down knowing that something was watching you, tracking every breath you took, every hoofbeat you made. They rode hard through the Badlands, pushing the horses until the trail vanished completely beneath a scatter of red rock and wild sage. Mateo was wrapped in thick canvas now, tied close to Esperanza's chest, sleeping as if the whole world didn't want him dead. Silas led them through a dry creek bed, half hidden beneath a thicket of overgrowth, his horse moving with the kind of practiced caution that only a man who's been hunted truly understands. Behind them, the storm gave way to a thin, starless quiet, the kind of quiet that meant Hawthorne's men were either regrouping or circling. They finally dismounted before the first light, tying the horses behind a twisted ledge of rock. They'd reached a small box canyon known to only a few, and fewer still knew about the shallow cave that cut into the canyon wall just above the ridge. Silas lit a small fire from dried pinon branches, just enough to warm them without giving away their position. Esperanza didn't speak at first. She just held Mateo close, rocking him gently even though he wasn't stirring. There was something in the way she moved, like she was rehearsing a goodbye she never wanted to say. Silas broke the silence. You didn't have to run into my barn. You could have kept going. She didn't look up from the child. I almost did. What stopped you? Her voice was a whisper. The dark looks safer than the road. He nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. He fed another small stick to the fire, watching the flames curl around it like hungry fingers. You want to tell me what's really going on now? He asked. Esperanza finally looked at him, and her look was different now. Not like before, not like someone begging for shelter. This time her stare was clean, sharp, measured. You already know, she said. I know Hawthorne's hunting a baby. That tells me what kind of man he is. But I don't know why. Not really. She shifted Mateo in her arms and unwrapped the top layer of cloth just enough to reveal his face for the first time. His cheeks were soft, a little red from the cold, his lips parted in a dreamless sleep. He's beautiful, Silas said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Esperanza didn't smile. His name is Mateo Daniel Delgado. Silas blinked. The middle name stopped him cold. Daniel? She nodded. That boy's name. Mateo, Silas said, his voice rough. That was my son's middle name, too. He hadn't said the name Daniel out loud in years, not since the coughing fits, the fever sweats, the prayers he had whispered too late. Not since the dry soil clung to his knees as he laid his own son beneath the old cottonwood, a grave marked only with a single carved stone. Something twisted inside his chest. It wasn't just grief. Not exactly. It was something raw. Something that had never healed. "I didn't name him after your son," she said quietly. "I never knew you had one." "I know. But it's strange, isn't it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "How names come back around." Silas stared into the fire, but he wasn't seeing the flames anymore. He was seeing fever-slick skin and a small boy's fingers clutching at nothing. He cleared his throat. "Mateo's father was Rafael Delgado, wasn't he?" Esperanza's jaw tightened. "Yes," Silas exhaled slowly. "I figured. You don't think that makes him guilty too?" He looked up at her sharply. "Don't put words in my mouth. You're the first person who hasn't." Silas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Your husband was fighting for the land his people were born on. He died for it." "Not a husband," she said quickly. "Not anymore." Silas nodded, letting it go. "I was his courier," she continued. "I carried messages, maps, sometimes medicines. That's how we met. We lost half our people in the government raid on Black Mesa. I was supposed to leave with him that night. Instead, I stayed behind to help a wounded boy." She looked down at Mateo. "And I got this one instead." Silas didn't answer for a long time. The fire crackled. The pieces were falling into place. "Then Hawthorne doesn't just want to erase the man," he said. "He wants to erase the entire bloodline." "Yes," she said, "and he'll burn down every soul who shelters us to do it." Silas stood up and walked to the entrance of the cave, looking out across the distant sleeping plains. The moon was gone, swallowed by clouds, but he could feel the land stretching out, quiet and watching. "They think the child is a threat," he said, more to himself than to her. "Not because of what he's done, but because of who he might become." Esperanza came to stand beside him. "That's what makes it worse." Behind them, Mateo stirred. A small cough, then a sleepy cry. Silas turned, walked over, and crouched down near the child. Esperanza moved like she wanted to shield him, but Silas just raised a hand. "Just a second." He reached out slow and gentle, offering one calloused finger. Mateo grabbed it. A simple, thoughtless motion, a baby's grip. But in that one small touch, Silas felt something ancient. A promise, maybe. Or the beginning of one. Silas whispered, "He's got his eyes? His father's?" "No," she said, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "He has my Daniels." For the first time, Esperanza looked at him with something close to real empathy. She didn't say it, but she knew. This man wasn't just helping her. He was remembering. And maybe, just maybe, he was forgiving himself. Before another word could pass between them, a sharp whistle cracked through the night air. Silas jerked upright. Another one followed, closer this time, sharper. Not birds, not coyotes, whistles, humans. Esperanza scrambled backward. "They found us." "No," Silas said, his eyes narrowing. "Not yet, but they're close." He moved quickly, kicking dirt over the small fire, grabbing the rifles and handing one to Esperanza. "Have you ever used one of these?" "Once," she said. "Tonight you learn again." She took it, her hand surprisingly steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Where do we go?" "There's a healer," he said, his voice urgent. "Lena Smoke. She lives up in the arroyo past Eagle Ridge. If we ride now, we might reach her by dawn. She'll help. She has her own reasons to hate a man like Hawthorne." Esperanza didn't ask what those reasons were. She just nodded. They saddled the horses in a tense silence. Mateo, half asleep, clung to his mother. As Silas mounted his horse, he looked back at the cave. Dark, quiet, still warm with the ghost of a fire. Then he muttered almost to himself, "We don't outrun this. Not forever." Esperanza heard him. "We don't have to," she said, her voice just loud enough to hear. Just far enough to survive the night. They rode into the dark again, torchless, their hearts pounding in their chests. And behind them, in the far distance, a single dog howled. The first rays of dawn were still just a pale rumor across the mesa when Silas pulled his horse to a sudden stop. Dust clung to every inch of him, his hat, his coat, his boots, his breath. His chest heaved from the hard climb, but his eyes stayed sharp as flint. They had made it, just barely. Nestled at the end of a narrow arroyo, half swallowed by sandstone and juniper trees, stood a crooked adobe hut. It had a thatched roof and a trail of smoke rising from it that was as thin as a needle's thread. A small wooden wind chime, made of bones and beads, swayed near the door. The kind of thing only one woman would hang without apology. Silas dismounted, motioning for Esperanza to do the same. Her arms were stiff from holding Mateo all night. The child had cried himself hoarse hours ago, then fallen into a strange, uneasy sleep. "Stay behind me," Silas said. "She doesn't shoot often, but she doesn't warn you twice either." He stepped forward and gave the doorframe 2 solid knocks, then 1 light tap. A pattern, one that hadn't been used in years. A long silence followed. Then came the sound of a heavy latch shifting, and the door creaked open. Lena Smoke stood in the doorway as if she'd never left it. She was tall, lean, with streaks of gray in her long black braid, and eyes like coals that had never quite gone cold. She wore a buckskin robe stitched with red thread, and a necklace of bear claws rested around her neck. She looked Silas over once, her expression unreadable. "You look worse than I remember." He managed a crooked half-smile. "Age catches up slow, but it doesn't miss." Her eyes flicked past him and landed on Esperanza, then on the bundle in her arms. "I don't take in strays," she said, her voice flat. "He's not a stray," Silas replied. "He's a fire waiting to burn this whole damn territory down." Lena raised an eyebrow. "You always did bring trouble as a gift." Silas didn't answer that. He simply nodded toward the boy. "Please, he's sick. Maybe just exhausted, but I think he's been carrying our fear for too long. It's weighing him down." Lena hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. "Bring him in." Esperanza looked at Silas once, a silent question in her eyes before she followed him inside. The hut smelled of sage and cedar. Dried herbs hung in bundles from the rafters. The light was low but warm. A single clay bowl was steaming over hot coals, some kind of tea. Lena reached for Mateo with the steady hands of someone who had touched too many broken things to flinch anymore. "He's warm," she murmured. "Too warm. Has he eaten?" "Some dried cornmeal. Water. That's all we had," Esperanza said. "Then you're lucky he's not worse." She moved quickly, crushing herbs, lighting a fresh fire and heating water. In minutes she had a poultice on Mateo's chest and a damp cloth on his forehead. Her hands worked in a practiced rhythm, but her eyes never stopped studying the mother and the man standing beside her. Finally, she asked the question. "Why is Hawthorne hunting you?" Silas answered before Esperanza could. "Because the boy's name is Mateo Daniel Delgado." Lena froze mid-motion. "Delgado, Raphael's son." Esperanza nodded. Lena's voice went cold. "The man who started the burning at Black Mesa." "He didn't start it," Esperanza said, her own voice sharp. "He was trying to stop the government from breaking treaty lines. Again. He died trying to save civilians." Lena looked at Silas. "You believe that?" "I believe that no child chooses the sins or the courage of their father." Lena grunted. She turned back to the fire. "Even the dead leave trails," she muttered. "But sometimes, so do the saved." The room grew quiet. Mateo stirred, letting out a soft cry. Not a cry of pain, just alive. Esperanza moved to cradle him, but Lena stopped her with a gentle hand. "He's healing. Let him rest." Outside, the wind shifted. Lena turned toward the door, frowning. You weren't followed. No, Silas said. I was careful. You're never careful enough with men like Hawthorne, she replied. I've seen what he leaves behind. Silas nodded grimly. That's why we need your help. My help does not come cheap. Esperanza stood up, her eyes still on Mateo. What do you want? Nothing from you, Lena said. Then she looked straight at Silas. But from him. I want the truth. Silas stiffened. You already know it. I want to hear you say it. Out loud. Silas looked down at his hands. They were scarred, silent things. I let them kill people, he said, his voice a low rasp. Years ago, back when I wore a badge under a different name, Hawthorne gave the order. I followed it. I called it duty. But it was cowardice. Lena's gaze didn't waver. Why'd you stop? Because I buried my son, then my wife. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the man who was standing there anymore. So I left. He looked over at Mateo. And now I see a chance to do one goddamn thing right. For a moment, the wind outside died completely. Lena walked over to the door, opened it wide, and looked out at the horizon. Hawthorne's men passed this ridge 2 days ago. They doubled back south. He'll return, with more dogs and more guns. How long do we have? Silas asked. Hours, she said. Maybe less. Esperanza's breath caught. Then we have to go. No, Lena said, her voice firm. If you run again now, he'll find you in the next arroyo. She turned to Silas. You want to keep this child alive? You'll have to do more than run. You'll have to burn your past clean. Silas looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. Are you asking me to fight? I'm telling you, she said, that you'll have to choose again. And this time, you won't have a badge to hide behind. Esperanza stepped forward. Then we stay. For now. Lena nodded. He can rest here tonight, but by morning you move. Where? Silas asked. There's an old pass north, behind Devil's Spine. It leads to the cottonwood groves. The river there will wash away your tracks. And you? I stay, Lena said. Someone has to mislead them. Silas frowned. They'll burn your place to the ground. Lena smiled, a grim, humorless thing. Let them try. A silence fell, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was the silence of a choice being made. Mateo stirred again, but this time he didn't cry. He reached upward, his small hand open toward the beams above. Esperanza leaned over and whispered to him, You're safe. For now. As Lena began to gather her things, she said without turning around, Get what sleep you can. Tomorrow it begins again. Outside, the wind picked up once more, and in the far distance, just barely audible beneath the rustling of the juniper trees, came the first long, sharp bay of a hound. The hounds were closer now. You could hear it in the rhythm of their howls. It was less of a searching sound, more of a certain one. That sharp, guttural tone that meant they'd finally caught the scent. They weren't just following a trail anymore. They were hunting. Lena stood in the doorway of her adobe hut, scanning the far ridgeline with eyes that missed nothing. Behind her, Silas was loading bullets into a weathered rifle. The click and snap of each round being chambered was steady, methodical. There was no panic in the sound, just preparation. Inside, Esperanza sat cross-legged beside the hearth. Mateo was asleep in her lap, his fever finally broken, his breath soft and even. She smoothed a hand over his fine hair, but her eyes never left the small window. They'll be here before sunset, Lena said flatly. Silas nodded. And they'll torch everything. They always do, she muttered, as if she'd lived through too many flames to flinch anymore. A moment passed, tight and silent. Then Lena turned and handed Silas a folded scrap of oilskin. Inside was a crudely sketched map, drawn in charcoal and marked with 3 red dots. Take the north trail, she said. Follow the creek bed until you hit the stone arch. After that, move fast through the canyon. Don't stop for anything. Esperanza stood up, carefully cradling Mateo. You're not coming with us. No, Lena said. I'm staying. I'll draw them off. That's suicide. Lena gave her a look like she'd heard that word too many times to care about it anymore. They think I'm old. They think I won't bite. Let's see how wrong they are. Silas stepped forward. You don't have to die for this. I'm not dying, Lena said, her voice hard. I'm buying you time. There's a difference. He stared at her for a long moment, then he offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. Go, before I change my mind. Silas helped Esperanza into the saddle, tucked Mateo securely against her, then mounted his own horse. The three of them turned toward the canyon, disappearing into the dust and scrub just as the first black silhouettes crested the southern ridge. Lena watched them until they had vanished completely. Then she turned back toward her home. She began setting her traps. The trail twisted, growing narrow between the canyon walls. Sharp shadows cut across the ground like broken blades. The creek bed was dry for now, but Silas knew a flash flood could roll through here in an hour's notice if the weather turned ugly. They rode in silence for miles. When they finally stopped to rest the horses, Esperanza finally spoke. Do you think she'll survive? Silas didn't answer right away. He passed her a canteen, waited for her to drink before he spoke. She's survived worse, he said. But this time she's lighting a fuse. Esperanza looked down at Mateo. I never asked anyone to die for us. No, Silas said. But people don't always die for who you are. Sometimes they die for what you carry. She nodded slowly, then looked up at him, her eyes intense. You think I came here just to hide? What? She straightened in her saddle, her voice hard as stone. I didn't run because I was scared. I ran because I needed time. Time to figure out how to keep him alive. But hiding was never the plan. Silas studied her face. Then what was? She looked toward the pass ahead, her jaw clenched. To raise him to be strong enough to finish what his father started. That hit him like a bullet between the ribs. And what if that gets him killed? Esperanza's voice didn't waver, not for a second. Then it'll be for something that matters. Silas had to look away. The weight of that answer pressed down hard against everything he'd spent years trying to bury. He thought of his own son, Daniel, of the fever, of the prayers he had whispered into a hollow silence, of the lonely grave marked with a name and nothing more. He tightened the reins. We need to keep moving. They mounted up again, but the silence between them wasn't empty this time. It was full of things that neither of them wanted to say out loud. By the time they reached the stone arch on Lena's map, the sky had turned a dirty, bruised gray. The air carried a warning. Storm or blood. Maybe both. Suddenly, a shadow moved up ahead. Silas yanked his horse to a stop, his rifle already half raised, but the figure stepped out into the open. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing a tattered cavalry coat, one shoulder torn. A long, ugly scar ran down the left side of his face like a crack through dry earth. My name's Clay Bairden, the man said, his voice a low rumble. You're a hard pair to track. Silas kept his rifle aimed at the man's chest. Depends who's asking. I rode with Hawthorne once, Clay said, a long time ago, before I knew any better. Esperanza's eyes narrowed. You switched sides? I got tired of lighting matches, he said. Figured I'd start putting some fires out instead. Silas didn't lower his rifle. How'd you find us? Lena sent word through the canyon. He nodded toward the shadows higher up. There's another rider waiting up on the ridge, a friend of hers. His name's Ira Bluehorse. He's holding the North Gap in case they try to double back on you. Silas hesitated, then finally lowered the rifle. Clay looked toward Esperanza. You got a hell of a price on your head, ma'am. So I've heard, she said. Men like Hawthorne, they don't stop until they're dead, Clay said. Or you are. We know. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Inside was a crest, a hawk burned into leather. This was taken off one of Hawthorne's men. Found him dead by the ridge, probably tried to flank Lena. Esperanza stared at the crest, then at Silas. We keep moving, she said. Clay nodded. I'll cover your back. They moved fast now. No more talk. No more stops. The storm crept in from the west, low and mean. But just as they reached a split in the trail, a loud boom cracked through the canyon. They all turned. Far behind them, a column of black smoke was curling into the sky. Lena's home. It was burning. Esperanza clutched Mateo tight to her chest. Her voice cracked as she whispered, She's gone. No, Silas said, his voice low, his jaw tight. She made sure we saw that fire. Clay narrowed his eyes. It's a message. She's still buying us time. Esperanza looked at Silas, a new fire in her own eyes. Then we owe her more than just survival. He met her gaze. We owe her a future. As thunder rolled across the high ridges, they spurred their horses north, toward Devil's Spine and the cottonwoods that lay beyond, and behind them, the last of Lena Smoke's fire swallowed the sky whole. The canyon narrowed until the sky was just a jagged line of blue above them. Walls of red stone rose on both sides, carved by centuries of wind and forgotten names. The air here was different. It felt thicker somehow, quieter. Even the horses seemed to step lighter. Silas knew where they were the moment they passed beneath an arch of charred petroglyphs. This wasn't just any pass. This was ghost country. Few people dared to cross it, and fewer still returned. My people buried warriors here, Silas said, his voice like gravel under a boot. You can die here, or you can rise with them. Clay Bearden, trailing just behind them with his rifle balanced across his saddle, spat into the dust. Comforting. Esperanza glanced at the canyon walls, where the shadows twisted into shapes that could have been ancient carvings, or just the memory of bones. She tightened her hold on Mateo, who stirred in his sleep, fussing as if he could sense the weight of the place. What is this place? She asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He rode a few more yards in the heavy silence before pointing to a cluster of jagged stones stacked up like crooked teeth. My father called it the Path of Broken Oaths. He said this was where the Apache dead listened to the living. Every warrior who died betrayed, or in a battle that wasn't of their choosing, passed through here on his way to the next world. Is that why it's so quiet? She asked. No, Silas said, his voice flat. It's quiet because people don't lie here. They dismounted near a ridge where a shallow cave split the rock wall. Clay stayed outside, scanning the trail behind them, while Silas guided Esperanza and Mateo inside. The cave was cool and dry. It smelled of old earth and pine smoke, the remnants of fires long gone. Silas cleared a space near the back, spreading a blanket over the smoothest patch of ground. Mateo whimpered again. He's hungry, Esperanza said. Silas pulled a cloth bundle from his saddlebag, dried jerky, cornbread, and a small tin of honey. It's not much, he said, but it's clean. She took it gratefully and began to feed Mateo in silence. When the baby finally calmed down, she leaned back against the cave wall and exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath since the moment she first knocked on Silas's barn door. Silas sat near the cave mouth, polishing his rifle with a strip of cloth. He didn't say much. Neither did Clay, who paced outside like a coyote with nowhere left to run. After a long pause, Esperanza spoke. How many people did Hawthorne kill? Clay stopped moving. The question landed heavy between them. Hard to say, he said finally. Too many. Some of them legal, most of them not. Silas looked up from his rifle. He hides behind the law, but it's just another gun to him, Esperanza nodded slowly. Then why don't more people stand up against him? Silas met her eyes. Because the ones who tried are buried. The cave went quiet again. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon like it had stories to tell, but no tongue left to shape them. Later, when the child was sound asleep and the fire had fallen to a faint orange glow, Esperanza shifted closer to Silas. She glanced at Mateo, then whispered, "You were a father." "I was." "Was he like Mateo?" Silas managed a smile, but it was soft and bitter. Daniel was louder. He was wild. He had a laugh that could scare the birds right out of the trees. "What happened to him?" "Fever," Silas said simply. "Took him in 2 days. His mother, she didn't last the year after." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." They sat there for a long time, quiet in their shared ruin, and then Mateo stirred, letting out a soft, high whimper. Silas moved without thinking, kneeling beside him, offering a finger. The baby gripped it tight. He didn't cry. Esperanza watched, surprised. "He doesn't cry when you hold him." Silas swallowed hard. "He knows I've lost before." Just then, Clay peeked into the cave. "We got movement on the ridge. 3 riders, maybe 4. Esperanza's hand went instantly to her holster. "No," Silas said. "Not yet." "Should we run?" Silas shook his head. "Not this time." Clay narrowed his eyes. "You got a plan?" "Sort of." He stood up and looked out across the ridge. "They don't know we're here yet, but they will. Hawthorne's not dumb." Esperanza moved to stand beside him. "Then what do we do?" Silas didn't answer right away. He stared out into the canyon, into the old land where too many ghosts walked and too few of the living dared to tread. Then he said, "We send Ira a signal. Tell him to hold the north gap. We're pushing through." Clay raised an eyebrow. "Through Devil's Spine? In the daylight?" "They won't expect it." Esperanza looked uncertain. "And if they do?" Silas checked his rifle. "Then we remind them what it costs to chase the wrong soul." Clay headed out to send the signal, leaving Silas and Esperanza in the quiet of the cave again. She looked at him, her expression soft. "You're changing." He looked down at Mateo, who was now clinging to his sleeve even in his sleep. "So are you," he said. Esperanza smiled faintly. "I think he's changing both of us." Silas nodded. "He doesn't carry sin in his blood," he said. "Just hope." They packed quickly. By the time the sun had fully broken over the high cliffs, they were moving north, riding fast through the shallow canyon mouth that led toward Devil's Spine. And behind them, faint but undeniable, came the sound of more riders, the echoes of war drums in hoofbeats. Esperanza looked back once, then at Silas. "They're coming." "I know." "You said this place was sacred. You think it'll protect us?" Silas tightened the reins. "No, but it'll remember us." And with that they rode out, 3 shadows racing against the wind toward the last pass between survival and sacrifice. The ghosts stayed behind, watching, waiting, whispering in the dust. The pass narrowed into a stone throat, its mouth choked with wind and ruin. Devil's Spine was no name for a place. It was a warning. A jagged ridge of red rock slicing across the canyon like nature's final brutal verdict. Below it, a broken old stone bridge spanned a narrow ravine. And beyond that, cottonwood trees, a thin river, and the faint promise of a life that wasn't ruled by pursuit. Silas pulled up his horse just before the edge. The bridge groaned in the wind, its old timbers worn soft by a century of sun and storms. One wrong step, and it would crumble into the chasm below. Clay rode up beside him. "There's no other way across." Silas shook his head. "Not fast enough. We try to circle north, we lose the light, and we lose our lead." Esperanza reached them, cradling Mateo tight to her chest. The child was awake now, quiet, alert. His dark eyes stared at the bridge as if he understood what waited for them on the other side. "Ira is watching the northern ridge," Clay said. "He'll slow anyone trying to flank us. But Hawthorne, he's close." "How close?" Silas asked. Clay hesitated. "Close enough to smell our sweat." Silas exhaled slowly through his nose. The wind pulled at his coat. The sun was dropping fast behind the cliffs, burning everything a deep golden red. A blood sky. "No more running," he muttered. "Not from them. Not from myself." Esperanza looked over, her mouth a tight line. "What are you going to do?" He dismounted from his horse. "I'm going to buy you a future." Clay stepped down too. "You're not doing it alone." "You've done enough," Silas said. "Don't insult me. I didn't switch sides just to watch someone else do all the bleeding." Esperanza clutched Mateo even harder. "You'll get killed." Silas met her eyes, and his were clear. "So will you, if I don't slow them down." She looked at the bridge. "It'll never hold under a charge." "I don't want it to," he said. The plan came fast, like it had already been living in the back of his mind for days. Clay would lead Esperanza and Mateo across the bridge to the cottonwoods. The trail on the other side would bend down into the riverbed, where their hoofprints would be harder to follow. Ira would intercept anyone coming around the top of the ridge, and Silas. Silas would hold the pass long enough to give them a clean break. And then, whatever came next, he'd meet it standing. Clay didn't argue. He knew the weight in Silas's voice. They tied Mateo to Esperanza's chest with cloth and leather, cinched tight, so she could ride hard. The child didn't cry, just watched Silas in silence, his little fingers curling in the air as if reaching for something he didn't understand. "Do me one favor," Silas said to Esperanza. "Don't stop riding, no matter what you hear." She nodded, tears lining her lashes. "You won't be alone." Silas looked away. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Clay mounted up, gave Silas one last, long look. "See you on the other side. Don't count on it." He watched them ride across. The bridge creaked and groaned, but it held. Just barely. When they reached the far end, Clay turned back and lifted a hand. Silas nodded once, then turned to face the pass. The sun dropped behind the cliffs, and Hawthorne arrived with fire. 4 riders first, then 2 more, silhouettes of men shaped by greed and vengeance. And at the center of them all was Marshal Jed Hawthorne, still sitting upright in his saddle like a judge who's come to deliver the final sentence. His coat was cleaner than it had any right to be. The badge on his chest gleamed like it had never known the blood that lay beneath it. "10 Crow!" he bellowed. "You're a stubborn bastard!" Silas stepped out from behind the rocks, his rifle held across his shoulder. "You boys picked the wrong ranch," he called back. Hawthorne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You know what's across that bridge, don't you?" "I do." "Then you know it won't matter. We'll catch her. We'll take the brat. And all you'll be is a warm corpse." Silas rolled his shoulders. "Might be. But you're going to have to walk through hell to get there." Hawthorne's face twisted into a snarl. "You got 1 shot to move, 10 Crow. Get out of the way, and I'll make it quick." Silas's jaw tensed. His hands tightened on his rifle. "I used to believe in men like you," he said, his voice carrying on the wind, "till I buried my son." Then he fired. The first bullet hit the lead rider's horse, sending it screaming into the dirt. The second dropped a man clean off his saddle before he'd even cleared his weapon. The pass exploded into chaos. Gunfire cracked and echoed across the stone. Horses screamed. Men shouted orders through clouds of dust and gun smoke. Silas moved like a ghost with a purpose. He ducked behind a boulder, reloaded, fired again. Every shot counted. Every bullet slowed the storm that was bearing down on the people he had chosen to protect. But numbers always catch up. Always. A round clipped his shoulder. Another grazed his side. He just kept firing. When he finally ran out of bullets, he grabbed a torch from one of the fallen men and lit the fuse he'd already laid beneath the bridge. Dry wood, dried pitch, old rope. It caught fast. He watched the flame snake along the base, and for one breathless second, the whole bridge glowed like a skeleton of fire. Then it fell. The sound was deafening. Wood cracking, splintering, collapsing into the deep ravine below. The smoke shot up like a flare, a final signal written in ash. Hawthorne cursed, pulling his horse to a stop just feet from the drop. He dismounted and stalked forward, his pistol in his hand. "You think this ends it?" he snarled. Silas staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his side. His rifle was empty, but his spine was straight. "I think it ends you. You're bleeding out, boy." "I've been bleeding for a long time," Silas said. "Tonight it just shows." Hawthorne raised his pistol, but before he could fire, another crack echoed from the cliffs above. A single shot. Hawthorne jerked, stumbled, then dropped like a stone. Ira Bluehorse stepped out from a high ridge, his rifle smoking, his eyes hard as rock. Silas looked up at him, then down at Hawthorne's still body. Then he collapsed. Blood soaked the dirt beneath him, mixing with dust and ash. His last breath came soft, like a whisper through the canyon. "Daniel." Far across the now broken bridge, Esperanza rode hard through the cottonwoods, clutching Mateo close. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The fire behind her said enough. Morning broke like a secret over the cottonwoods, quiet, soft, golden. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind only damp earth and a hush that felt almost holy. The sky stretched wide and blue above the high desert, and somewhere far off, a single lark began to sing. Esperanza sat by the riverbank, her boots in the cool water, with Mateo wrapped in her arms. He was asleep, his thumb tucked near his mouth, his little chest rising and falling, steady and sure. A small miracle, still breathing, still hers. Across from her, Ira Bluehorse squatted near a smoldering fire pit, sharpening a hunting knife on a flat stone. His coat was stained with dirt and dried blood, but his hands were calm, patient, like a man who had buried too many things to ever rush again. They hadn't spoken much since dawn. There wasn't much left to say. Silas was gone. No one had to tell her. She'd felt it like a rope snapping inside her chest the moment the bridge gave way and the gunfire finally faded into silence. He had made his choice, and now she had to make hers. "Ira," she said softly, careful not to wake the baby. He looked up. "I need to go farther north." He nodded. "You got family there?" "No," she said, "but Mateo needs a place where the law doesn't know his name." He considered that for a moment, then nodded again. "I'll ride with you till you reach the foothills. After that, you're better off being quiet." She managed a tired smile. "Are you always this generous with strangers?" He stared into the fire. "You stopped being a stranger the moment he died for you." They fell into silence again, and the wind moved through the cottonwood trees like a slow, deep breath. She looked down at Mateo, brushing a bit of dust from his brow. "He didn't have to help us," she said. "Not really." "No," Ira replied, "but it wasn't about you." She nodded. "It was about Daniel." "Maybe," Ira said. "Or maybe he just needed to believe that something could still be saved." She thought about that for a long time, about what it meant to live with ghosts and still choose life, about the way Silas had touched Mateo's hand like it was the first warmth he'd felt in years, about the fire, the gunshots, the blood in the dust, and how even after all of that the baby had smiled once, just once. But it was enough. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small object. Silas's hat. Clay had recovered it from the edge of the ravine before they fled. Esperanza held it for a moment, then she walked over to a cottonwood tree. Its trunk was thick, its roots spread wide like a mother's arms. She hung the hat on a low branch, tying it tight with a leather cord so the wind wouldn't steal it away. I'll tell him about you, she whispered to the empty air. When he's older. Ira watched from a distance but didn't interrupt. She stood there for a while longer, letting the breeze move through her hair, letting the deep ache in her chest settle into something quieter, something permanent. Then she turned back, picked up Mateo, and tucked him securely against her side. Time to move. They crossed the shallow river before midday, the sun warm on their backs. Ira led the way, his rifle slung low, his horse moving silent beneath him. And behind them, hanging in the tree like a marker that was not meant for sorrow, Silas 10 Crow's hat swayed gently in the wind. Weeks later, in a town with no name on the edge of another frontier, a woman walked into a trading post with a baby strapped to her back and a mind full of scars. She paid in coin, and she didn't ask questions. When the clerk asked for the child's name for his ledger, she hesitated for only a second. Daniel, she said. He nodded, scribbled it down, and never looked twice. In time, the story of a lone rider who held a canyon against Marshal Hawthorne and his men became something whispered in saloons and trading camps. A myth, maybe. A warning. A legend shaped by fire and sacrifice. But for one woman, and for the boy who would grow up to carry 2 names and no shame, it was never about legend. It was about mercy. About choosing to be the hand that lifts instead of the one that strikes. And that blood, no matter who spilled it, never decided the worth of a life. That was Silas 10 Crow's final truth. And now, it lives on. If you were on the edge of your seat through Silas's journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because there are always more stories hidden in the dust of the Old West, just waiting to be told.